And I want to start out today with a little bit of a story. Um, Friday night, I went to a basketball game. Okay. And if you've ever been to a basketball game, you know that it is not uncommon to hear a whistle blow, right? Now, let me ask you this. This is that there's going to be a little bit interactive today. Actually, it's going to be a lot interactive at the end, so be prepared to be challenged. Um, but when you go to a basketball game and you hear the whistle blown, why does that happen? You have a whistle and there, whistle blow and there's a foul. Why else? Traveling. Okay, violations. Okay, what else? Timeouts. What else? Out of bounds, out of play. Substitutions. I had jump ball. That was the only other thing I had on my list. You actually had a better list than what I did, but there's all sorts of reasons that you can hear a whistle blown at a basketball game. And as I was watching this game on Friday night, I was thinking about the framework that we've been looking over the last month. And we had a category there of flagrant foul, right? That's a reason that that an official would blow the whistle during a basketball game. But I want to ask you this. Why are fouls called in a basketball game? Safety? I'm sorry? The rules? Yeah. I'm going to give you special language for this today. And it's because someone has done something to try to gain an unfair advantage. Today, we're going to talk an awful lot about unfair. We're going to talk an awful lot about unfair. Now, today's lesson, we're going to continue looking at forgiveness. And this is an important lesson today, and it's important for a number of reasons. But I want to encourage you to pay special attention. And those of you who are note takers, I actually want to encourage you to take more notes than normal. Because I think I think it's a very timely lesson. You're going to be traveling, you're going to be seeing family, there's, different things that are going to be going on. You're going to be seeing people, you're going to find yourself in situations that you may not find yourself in at other times over the rest of the year. And some of those will give you the opportunity to make massive progress in your forgiveness when you understand unfair. Now, I've shared with you before that my daughter Brendan, I actually was going to make her come to this lesson today, but then I thought I might embarrass her. And then whenever I left this morning, she wasn't even out of bed. Was she out of bed? Bryn, she up? Okay. You never know, right? But I've shared with you how she has this core value of fairness, and that it has expressed itself in some very unique ways in our household on a few occasions. So I need to tell you something explicit this morning that I want you to start your notes with. Fouls are unfair, and the need to forgive is unfair. The need to forgive is unfair. Now, you've likely heard me tell a story before about how one day God looked down and he looked at planet Earth and he said, you know what? The world needs you. Now, this isn't a biblical story. This is my made-up version or how my imagination interprets it. But, one day God looked down at planet Earth and he says, you know what? The world would be a much better place with you in it. And he got to work and he got to making you. And he formed you in heaven. He took your soul, he took your spirit, And he sent you to earth and he equipped you with special skills and talents and interests and abilities for the work that he wants you to do. And as you look around, you can see that God's very creative. We don't all look the same, right? We've got different interests, we've got different talents, we've got different abilities. But I want you to know that based on your point of origin, your citizenship is that of a citizen of heaven. You start out as a citizen of heaven. And some of us need to be reminded of that this morning. It's easy to get caught up in things. It's easy to get distracted. So I'm going to invite you to say to yourself this morning, I am a citizen of heaven. This is an interactive part of the lesson. This is where you say, I am a citizen of heaven. Now, just because you start as a citizen of heaven, it does not mean you stay a citizen of heaven. You can start out as a citizen of Pennsylvania and you can move, right? I don't know why people would, but they may move to, say, Ohio, Texas, California, Florida, Canada, Mexico, wherever, right? Just because you start in one place, it doesn't mean that's where you end. You can surrender your citizenship, and you can surrender your citizenship of heaven. And we know that's what Satan did, right? Start off as an angel, citizen of heaven. What has he done with that? He has surrendered it. And so if we need to recognize that people can do that too. And we need to know that people do that all the time. They surrender to sin and they reject the forgiveness that Jesus brings. So for the purposes of today's study, I want to encourage you to keep in mind your position as a citizen of heaven as your primary position, right? I want to encourage you to keep that for your perspective. I want you to keep that ahead of nationality. I want you to keep that ahead of political persuasion. I want you to keep that ahead of ethnicity or gender or age or any other label that exists that can divide people. Because when we start using those other labels, what do? We start dividing people. Now, every week we start off by reviewing our core values as they are on the board. And I want to encourage you to keep your values centered from heaven down and not earth up. Okay? That's my challenge as we get started here this morning. Now, I tell you this as it's especially obvious at this time of year that heavenly minded actions have earthly results. I'm going to say that again. Heavenly minded actions have earthly results. And the birth of Jesus illustrates this beautifully. And what I want you to keep in mind is that when things happen in heaven, things happen in heaven, they come to earth, and when they come to earth, there's conflict. When things come to earth, the result is conflict, unrest. You can find this in the creation story. God's creating the heavens and the earth. Whenever God speaks, whenever heaven comes to earth, there's all sorts of change. There's all sorts of disruption. When heaven enters earth, it is not comfortable. And the story of Jesus' birth is anything but comfortable. The birth of Christ is not about heaven adapting to earth. It is about heaven confronting earth. And we see this time and time and time and time and time again throughout the Bible. We see this throughout the life of throughout the life of Jesus and every other story in the Bible. It's about when heaven confronts earth, things on earth change. I want to invite you to turn with me to the Gospel of John, chapter 16. John 16, verse 33. Now, I've probably made you underline this verse before. I'm going to make you underline it again. All right? Jesus is speaking. He says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. I want to encourage you to especially underline the word trouble. And I want you to keep this in mind. Trouble is unfair. Trouble is unfair. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Turn a couple pages back to 2 Corinthians chapter 2. And look at verse 14. The Apostle Paul writes, but thanks be to God who always leads us as captives in Christ's triumphal procession and uses us to spread the aroma of the knowledge of Him everywhere. So I want to capture just a couple ideas that we have so far because I want to make sure that we have our perspective aligned the right way. All right? I want to make sure we don't get too far. Forgiveness is necessary when something unfair has happened. Right? There's a connection between those. John tells us that we will have unfair things that happen in our lives. And Jesus says in the Gospel of John that we're going to have unfair things, right? We're going to face trouble. But to take heart, I have overcome the world. Overcome. Paul uses different language. He uses the word triumph. Triumph implies victory. Victory implies battle. We're in battles all the time. Going back to where I started, a basketball game, there's battles, right? There's unfair things that happen. Whistles get blown, right? Things are unfair. And Jesus is our ultimate example of overcoming unfair. Jesus is our ultimate example of forgiveness. And as followers of Christ, we must show forgiveness just as He showed forgiveness. Now, I'm going to ask, how many of you think that it's very easy to say we should forgive? Easy to say. Who's going to agree that it's hard to do? It's hard to do. It's hard to do, right? Easy to say, it's less easy to do. I think Sean used this example a couple of weeks ago when he was talking about the parent telling the child to apologize, right? We've all seen it. We've probably been a part of it on a couple of different levels. There's conflict that happens between children, and you give them the order that, hey, you need to get over this, say you're sorry, sorry, right? And tell them to give each other a hug, and they hug and they hold their heads away from each other. We've seen this, right? We have noticed forgiveness that is not sincere. And I want you to know that this process of unsincere forgiveness is not limited by age. This is not something that only children do. This is something that we all can still do. We can have unsincere forgiveness. So I'm going to make two columns here. On one side, I'm going to say fake forgiveness. And on the other side, we're going to say true forgiveness. Fake forgiveness is prideful. True forgiveness is humble. Fake forgiveness keeps count. You know anybody that's keeping count? You ever see that person in the mirror? True forgiveness loses count. Fake forgiveness thinks that forgiveness is optional. True forgiveness knows it's mandatory. Fake forgiveness is about giving what is deserved. True forgiveness is about grace that's undeserved. Fake forgiveness focuses on the faults of others. True forgiveness focuses on God's forgiveness. Fake forgiveness becomes acceptable when things are fair. True forgiveness comes when unfair. Today's lesson, after the first 23 minutes of this lesson, is about forgiving unfair. Over the last several weeks, we've discussed that forgiveness is a process. It's not a one and done thing. It's something that happens over time. And because there's a process, there's many steps involved. And because there's many steps involved, there's times that we can get tired on the pathway and we can stop. We can there's many places that we can stop along the path and we can sit down and we can just take a break, right? Now, if you were going along a path and you got tired and you decided to sit down, what would you look for? You would look for a seat, right? For the purpose of this lesson, maybe, I'm going to give you this in the context of chairs. I'm going to give you 4 chairs that people sometimes sit down and sometimes they stay. Or sometimes they sit down and they stay. Now, I'm going to tell you, fake forgiveness will pretend that these chairs don't exist. But when we recognize true forgiveness, we can stand up and we can move forward. Now, I want you to know that it's easy to sit down at any of these chairs. And it's especially easy to sit down at any of these chairs when we don't first acknowledge that having to forgive is all about unfairness. We have to forgive unfair. What happened to you, you probably didn't deserve. You probably didn't ask for it. You probably didn't want it. You wouldn't wish it on somebody. It's unfair, right? And it's unfairness that invites us to take a seat and to stay there and to get stuck. Now, as I give you these 4 chairs, I want you to know that these 4 chairs are not sins. You'll probably recognize these chairs pretty easily, right? These are simply places that people sit down when life doesn't make sense. Now, in the world of psychology, I believe this is something that they call cognitive dissonance. It's a fancy term, but cognitive dissonance is a place we get to when we can't make sense of things around us, and as a result, we end up doing nothing. We get stuck. You don't know if you should do this, you don't know if you should do that, so the end result is you do nothing. I'll give you an example. Anybody in here know anyone that wants to lose a couple of pounds? Right? We can probably all find that. Now, here's the thing. How many different ways are there to lose weight? How many different diets have you seen in your life? Dozens and dozens and dozens. And the fact of the matter is that most of us start looking at these. Like I find the donut diet, like, sounds good. The eat 12 meals a day diet, like there's all these different things. But what you end up getting overwhelmed and you don't know to do this, you don't know to do that, and as a result, you do nothing. And you stay stuck. You stay right where you are. The danger isn't sitting in any of these chairs. The danger is staying in these chairs. So what are the 4 chairs? Chair number 1 is the chair of betrayal. It's the chair of betrayal. Now, I'm going to have to ask, we have a lot to get to, so I'm going to cherry pick some verses here. We got a lot of text, and my guess is this is text that's very familiar to you. So would it be all right if we don't read the text word for word? I don't want to be disrespectful, but I want to make sure that I want to add value to you this morning. When you think of the Christmas story, can you think of anyone who faced betrayal? And I'm going to suggest to you that perhaps somebody that would be on that list be a guy by the name of Joseph, right? Joseph gets word that Mary, his wife to be, is with child. Well, does that not put you in a place where you could have a seat for betrayal? Right? The angel of the Lord comes to Joseph, tells him what's going on. And even though, from Joseph's perspective, trust appears to be broken, his reputation is at risk. The plans that he had for his future have been turned upside down. What do you think that was like for Joseph? We can read this, and you can read it in the children's Bible, and Joseph probably has a big smile on his face. I would suggest to you that it was probably something far from that as that story unfolded for him. I would suggest that. Joseph had every right, culturally and legally, to walk away from that situation. The chair of betrayal says, "Someone I trusted wounded me." And can we not all say that? Someone we trust has betrayed us. They've wounded us. And I would hazard a guess that we can all think of someone who has sat down in this chair. And some of us may know people who are still sitting in this chair today. They're sitting in the chair of betrayal. Joseph had valid reasons to take a seat in this chair. But he didn't. He didn't. Joseph didn't stay seated because he remained open to God's voice. You may want to make note of that. When you feel betrayed, you may want to make sure that you remain open to God's voice. Joseph chose obedience over offense. And he trusted God with what didn't make any sense at all to him. What feels like betrayal may actually be God inviting you into a bigger story. Now, I can say that to you because that is Joseph's testimony. What seemed like betrayal to him was actually an invitation to something bigger. I want to make this personal for you. When God sent you to planet Earth, He had a purpose for you. And you finding that purpose may very well include enduring some horrible and challenging things, things that do not make sense. That's Joseph's story. The second chair is the chair of blame. Anybody ever come across this chair? Tripped over it, taken a seat, propped your feet up? From my perspective, this may be more like a lazy boy recliner. You may get in that and just pull the crank back, and hey, that's where it's going to be, right? This is Mary's story. Text I would give you is Luke chapter 1, verses 26 to 38. Mary's story was so unfair. Young lady, whole life ahead of her. And what happens? The angel comes to her and gives her a story, and the result of that is unfair. Verse 28, the angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored." Doesn't that seem backwards? Doesn't that I mean, isn't that something to consider? Mary is favored by God, but how do you think the people talked about her? What do you think the people said? And because she submitted to God's will, she endures social shame because of her obedience. And if she was to try to defend herself, how credible do you think that is? Pregnant Mary walking around. Mary, what happened to you? Oh, God came, had a conversation with me. I'm carrying I'm carrying the Savior. Who's believing that? And you know what? She's not the only person in the Bible, and she's not the only person since the Bible who's found themselves in such a situation, right? The blame chair says, I'm paying for something I didn't do. It's someone else's fault that I am in this situation. And in some cases, the person that puts you in that situation is God. We're going to have to talk about that at some point. We're going to have to do that. I made a note here, and we could give a lot of examples, but like how many different personalities in the Bible found themselves in situations that they would not have invited because they did what God told them to do. I wrote Moses. I think of Daniel. I think of Elijah on Mount Carmel confronting the prophets of Baal, right? He wins and he has to flee. The blame chair is real. Mary could have rejected the invitation, she could have rejected the opportunity, but she didn't. She didn't sit in that chair. She didn't argue for fairness, but she surrendered to faith. Her words were, "Let it be according to your will." And God didn't remove the blame. I'm sure horrible things were said about Mary. And what did God do? He gave her the grace to endure it all. Chair number 3. Chair number 3 is the chair of bypassed. Have you ever been overlooked? Have you ever been the best qualified for a job that you didn't get? Know anybody like that? Have you ever can you imagine somebody important is coming to town, but when the person got there, there was no room in the inn? Can you imagine that? Luke chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. The Bible is full of stories and wisdom that goes against what most people would think or expect. In the world today, how much fanfare is there when a new monarch is crowned? How much pomp and circumstance is there when a new president is inaugurated? If if you're at the supermarket, you're in church, you're not allowed to lie on this one. Have you ever read the headlines on the tabloids? We get so excited that some celebrity is going to have a baby. We've all seen this. We've all seen this. But when Jesus shows up, largely unnoticed, there was no preparation, there was no priority, there was barely a place, right? He's literally born on the margins. And the thing is that when we get this feeling of being bypassed, when we get this feeling of being looked over, it's easy to say, if I mattered, someone would have made room for me. It's easy to find ourselves there. The Bible tells us that the birth of Jesus was announced not to kings, not to priests in Judea or Samaria or Galilee. The birth of Jesus was announced to shepherds. You can find that story in Luke chapter 2, verses 8 through 20. The shepherds were the people who were overlooked by society, but they were chosen by heaven. And they had the privilege of being the first to witness the glory of God. Here's a truth that we all need to understand. Being bypassed by people does not mean you've been overlooked by God. I'm going to say that again. Being bypassed by people doesn't mean you've been overlooked by God. And I'm going to take it a step further. And I believe that God can hide your value to some people. Going back to where we started with this particular chair, you've ever been the best qualified for a job that you didn't get? Nobody, it's apparently happened to nobody in this room. Oh, somebody. It's happened to one person in this room. God can hide your value. He can make it so that they can't see because He has a bigger and better plan. God can hide your value from the wrong people to protect and direct you. And this brings us to chair number 4, our last chair. How am I doing time-wise here? I'm pushing the end here. Chair number 4. This chair's different. These are things that can happen to us. These are things that can happen to us. But the 4th chair, this chair happens when we have power or we have position. All right? This is the chair of bitterness. And the example that I will give you from the Christmas story is King Herod. Now, the story that I would point you to comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 18. This is the story of the wise men coming, seeking Jesus. And when they came to town, they decided that they would go to King Herod and say, "Hey, we understand the new king's in town. Tell me where he's at." And King Herod, what does he have? He has power and position. And he finds out that there's somebody new on the block that's going to take his place. And how does that make him feel? Bitter. And what's he end up doing? He says to the wise men, "Tell me where you find him, because I want to go worship him myself." That wasn't his motive. In fact, he would call for the execution of all male children. That's called bitterness. It's called bitterness. Herod hears of a newborn king and he responds with fear, he responds with control, he responds with violence. He has power, but he adds to that insecurity. And when you put those things together, that equals bitterness. And maybe it's not plus, maybe it's times. I don't know what the biblical math on that is. I didn't research that as well as I probably could have. Bitterness says, "I will protect myself at all costs." And this is perhaps the most dangerous chair for any of us, right? Because when you find yourself here, you can feel justified in being here. It can actually seem like the smart thing to do. When bitterness sits on the throne, it always demands casualties. Now, I don't know if you've thought of these four chairs before. And this is just another framework to share with you. Do with this as you will. But I want you to know that Jesus navigated all these chairs. Jesus would navigate betrayal. He would navigate blame. He would be overlooked. He absorbed all sorts of bitterness on the cross. Jesus didn't avoid the chairs. In fact, he had the opportunity to sit in each and every one of them. But he navigated each one of them so that you and I wouldn't have to stay in them. I'm going to challenge you now. I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes, and I know it's warm in here. I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes. Don't fall asleep, but I want to ask you to do this. By show of hands, your eyes are closed so you can't see. I can see who's raising hands, but this is just my little curious experiment. Have you ever sat in the chair of betrayal? Have you ever sat in the chair of blame? Have you ever sat in the chair of being bypassed? Have you sat in the chair of bitterness? Brothers and sisters, are you sitting in any of these chairs today? If you're sitting in any of these chairs today, while your eyes are still closed, I want to invite you to stand up. we're we're not going to circle the room. Just stay where you're at.